Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today we're diving headfirst into the world of political philosophy with one of the most influential and controversial books ever written by Niccolo Machiavelli. Now, I know what you might be thinking, a 16th century political treatise, isn't that like ancient history? And yeah, Machiavelli penned this bad boy way back in 1513, but here's the thing, its insights into power, leadership and human nature are just as relevant today as they were back then. We're going to unpack Machiavelli's key arguments, explore the historical context that shaped his thinking, and most importantly, examine why it continues to spark debate and shape our understanding of politics even after all these years. Buckle up, because we're about to get Machiavellian. So, Machiavelli wrote as a practical guide for rulers, particularly those who were new to power. He wasn't interested in abstract ideals or moralizing. He was all about giving it to you straight, no chaser. Machiavelli wanted to understand how power was actually acquired and maintained, even if it meant getting your hands a little dirty. One of his most enduring contributions is his analysis of how rulers can acquire and maintain power. He argued that sometimes it's necessary to bend the rules, to be cunning, even ruthless, to achieve political goals. He famously said, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." Now, this doesn't mean turning into a tyrannical monster. Machiavelli believed that a ruler should strive to be both feared and loved, but if you had to pick one, fear was the more reliable option. He argued that love is fickle. People can easily withdraw their affection. Fear, on the other hand, is based on a much more primal instinct, self-preservation. Machiavelli also stressed the importance of building a strong military and establishing a reputation for decisiveness. He believed that a ruler who appeared weak or indecisive would be quickly taken advantage of. He also emphasized the importance of understanding the political landscape, knowing your enemies, and building alliances. Now, before you start thinking Machiavelli was some kind of power-hungry cynic, it's important to remember the historical context in which he was writing. Italy in the 16th century was a hotbed of political intrigue, with city-states constantly vying for power and foreign powers meddling in their affairs. Machiavelli himself had been exiled from Florence, his home city, after a change in government. He knew firsthand the dangers of political instability and the lengths to which people would go to seize and maintain power. So while his ideas might seem harsh or even immoral to some, they were shaped by his lived experience in a world where political survival often depended on making tough choices. And here's the thing, even though the world has changed a lot since Machiavelli's time, his ideas about power dynamics and political strategy still resonate. We see them play out in modern politics all the time, from international relations to corporate boardrooms. One of the reasons Machiavelli's work continues to resonate is his brutally honest assessment of human nature. He wasn't interested in some idealized version of humanity. He wanted to understand how people actually behaved, particularly when it came to matters of power. Machiavelli believed that human beings were inherently self-interested and ambitious. He argued that people are driven by a desire for security, power, and glory, and that these desires often lead them to act in ways that are not always rational or moral. He wrote, "Men are driven by two principal impulses, either by love or by fear." He believed that while people are capable of great things, they are also easily swayed by their passions and are prone to deception and treachery, especially when their interests are at stake. This view of human nature informed his advice to rulers. He believed that a prince must understand that not everyone is going to play by the rules, and that sometimes it's necessary to fight fire with fire. This is where his famous phrase, "the ends justify the means," comes in. Now, this phrase is often misinterpreted as a license for ruthless behavior, but Machiavelli's point was more nuanced than that. He argued that in the messy world of politics, sometimes a ruler has to make difficult choices that might involve deception or even violence to achieve a greater good. For example, if a ruler can prevent a war by using a bit of trickery, even if it means breaking a promise, Machiavelli would argue that this is a justifiable action if it saves lives and preserves the state. He believed that the stability and well-being of the state should be the ultimate goal of the ruler, and that sometimes this means setting aside personal morality for the greater good. Machiavelli's insights into human nature are just as relevant today as they were in the 16th century. We see them play out in our own lives, in our relationships, in our workplaces, and of course in the realm of politics. Understanding that people are motivated by a complex mix of self-interest, ambition, and idealism is crucial for anyone who wants to navigate the world of power, whether they're a CEO, a politician, or just someone trying to get ahead. All right, let's talk about realpolitik, a term that gets thrown around a lot, especially in discussions about international relations. It essentially means realistic politics or politics based on power, and it's often associated with a pragmatic, even cynical view of international affairs. Now, Machiavelli didn't actually use the term realpolitik, it was coined later, but his ideas in are considered foundational to this school of thought. Why? Because Machiavelli argued that in the realm of international politics, moral considerations often take a backseat to national interest and the pursuit of power. He believed that states, like individuals, are driven by self-preservation and the pursuit of power. He argued that there's no higher authority in international relations, no global police force to enforce rules or punish bad behavior. It's essentially a self-help system where states have to look out for their own interests, even if it means making alliances of convenience or resorting to force. Machiavelli's emphasis on pragmatism over idealism, on national interest over moral crusades, has resonated with many practitioners of realpolitik throughout history. From Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor who unified Germany in the 19th century, to Richard Nixon's opening to China during the Cold War, leaders have often adopted Machiavellian tactics to navigate the complex and often ruthless world of international politics. Now, realpolitik has its critics, and rightfully so. They argue that it can lead to a cynical and amoral approach to foreign policy, where the pursuit of power trumps any consideration for human rights or international law. And there are certainly historical examples where realpolitik has been used to justify some pretty awful things, from colonialism to genocide. However, proponents of realpolitik argue that it's important to be realistic about how the world works. They argue that states can't afford to be naive or idealistic in the face of threats to their security or interests. Sometimes, they argue, you have to make tough choices, even morally ambiguous ones, to protect your own. The debate over realpolitik and its ethical implications is as relevant today as it ever was. In a world grappling with climate change, terrorism, and the rise of new global powers, the question of how to balance national interest with moral considerations remains as pressing as ever. So, we've talked about Machiavelli's views on power, human nature, and international relations, but what about his advice on leadership, particularly during times of crisis? Well, Machiavelli believed that times of crisis separated the sheep from the goats, the pretenders from the true leaders. He argued that it's in these moments of extreme pressure that a ruler's true character is revealed. He wrote that a prince must be willing to make difficult decisions, even unpopular ones, to preserve the state. He argued that a ruler who's afraid to act decisively in a crisis will quickly lose the respect of his people and become vulnerable to his enemies. Machiavelli believed that a leader needs to be adaptable, able to adjust their strategies and tactics as circumstances change. He stressed the importance of being prepared, of anticipating problems before they arise, and having contingency plans in place. He also emphasized the importance of communication, of keeping the people informed and rallying them to a common cause, especially during times of uncertainty and fear. Now, one of the most controversial aspects of Machiavelli's advice on leadership in crisis is his willingness to condone actions that many would consider morally reprehensible. For example, he argued that it's sometimes necessary for a ruler to use deception, cruelty, or even violence to maintain order and stability. He famously wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." He argued that fear, while not ideal, is a more reliable tool for ensuring obedience and preventing rebellion. Now, it's important to remember that Machiavelli wasn't advocating for cruelty for its own sake. He believed that any use of force should be calculated and proportionate to the threat at hand. He argued that a ruler should never be cruel unnecessarily, as this would only breed resentment and instability. But he also believed that a ruler who was seen as weak or indecisive would be quickly taken advantage of, and that sometimes a show of force was necessary to deter enemies and maintain order. Machiavelli's ideas on leadership in crisis, while controversial, offer valuable insights into the challenges faced by leaders throughout history and today. From wartime presidents to CEOs navigating economic downturns, leaders are often called upon to make difficult decisions under immense pressure, decisions that can have far-reaching consequences. All right, let's dive into one of the most enduring and, frankly, uncomfortable aspects of Machiavelli's philosophy: the tension between ethics and effectiveness in leadership. Machiavelli argued that in the messy world of politics, rulers sometimes have to make tough choices that might require them to compromise their moral principles in order to achieve their goals. He famously wrote, "There is no other way to guard yourself against flattery than by making men understand that telling you the truth will not offend you." He argued that a ruler who's overly concerned with being loved or admired risks being manipulated by flatterers and yes-men. He believed that it's better for a ruler to be feared than loved, not because he enjoyed the idea of being feared, but because he believed that fear was a more reliable tool for ensuring obedience and maintaining order. Now, this doesn't mean that Machiavelli believed that rulers should be completely immoral. He recognized that cruelty and deception should be used sparingly and strategically. He argued that a ruler should strive to be both loved and feared, but if he had to choose, fear was the safer bet. He also believed that a ruler should cultivate a reputation for honesty and fairness, even if he couldn't always live up to those ideals in practice. He argued that appearing virtuous could be just as effective as actually being virtuous, and sometimes even more so. This tension between ethics and effectiveness lies at the heart of many debates about leadership, both in politics and in other areas of life. We often admire leaders who are seen as both ethical and effective, who are able to achieve great things while remaining true to their values. But what happens when those values come into conflict? What happens when a leader has to choose between doing what's right and doing what's necessary? These are questions that have no easy answers, and Machiavelli doesn't offer any either. His point is not to provide a simple formula for ethical leadership, but to force us to confront the uncomfortable realities of power and the difficult choices that leaders often face. He challenges us to think critically about our own values and how we would navigate the complex moral landscape of leadership. All right, let's talk about Machiavelli's views on military strength, because for him, a strong military was not optional. It was the backbone of a stable and prosperous state. He argued that a ruler who neglected his military was essentially asking to be conquered. He believed that a strong military acted as a deterrent to enemies, making them think twice before attacking. He famously wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him." He believed that a wise ruler surrounds himself with capable advisors, people who are not afraid to challenge his assumptions and offer honest counsel. He argued that a ruler should never delegate his military responsibilities entirely to others. He believed that a ruler should have a strong understanding of military strategy and tactics, and should be actively involved in the training and equipping of his troops. Machiavelli also stressed the importance of maintaining a well-disciplined and loyal army. He believed that a ruler should be generous in rewarding his soldiers for their service, but also ruthless in punishing any breaches of discipline or acts of cowardice. Now, Machiavelli's emphasis on military strength might seem a bit outdated in our modern era, where diplomacy and international cooperation are often seen as the preferred methods for resolving conflicts. However, it's important to remember that Machiavelli was writing in a time when warfare was much more common and states were constantly vying for power and territory. And while the nature of warfare has certainly changed, the underlying principle of Machiavelli's argument remains relevant. A state that cannot defend itself is a state that is vulnerable to attack or coercion. This is why even today states invest heavily in their militaries, even in times of peace. All right, let's talk about an aspect of leadership that's often overlooked, but is absolutely crucial, especially in our modern media-saturated world: public perception, management. Machiavelli understood that a ruler's hold on power depended not only on brute force, but also on the consent and support of the governed. He argued that a ruler must be a master of image management, carefully cultivating a public persona that inspires respect, admiration, and even fear. He wrote, "It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles." He believed that true leadership was not about inherited status or empty accolades, but about the qualities and actions of the individual. He argued that a ruler should be mindful of how his actions are perceived by the public and should strive to appear decisive, courageous, and even ruthless when necessary. He believed that a ruler should be willing to use propaganda and other forms of public relations to shape public opinion in his favor. He also understood the importance of symbolism and spectacle in shaping public perception. He argued that a ruler should use public appearances, ceremonies, and even architecture to project an image of power and grandeur. Now, Machiavelli's ideas on public perception management might seem cynical to some, but they reflect a deep understanding of human psychology. He understood that people are easily swayed by appearances, and that a ruler who can control the narrative can control the people. His insights are just as relevant today as they were in the 16th century. In our modern media landscape, where information spreads at lightning speed and images can make or break a leader's reputation, the ability to manage public perception is more important than ever. All right, let's dig into one of Machiavelli's most famous and often misunderstood pronouncements. It's better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. Now, this statement has often been interpreted as an endorsement of tyranny, as if Machiavelli was saying that rulers should rule through fear and intimidation. But a closer reading of reveals that Machiavelli's views on fear and love were far more nuanced than that. Machiavelli believed that a ruler should strive to be both loved and feared, but he recognized that this was a difficult balance to achieve. He argued that love is fickle. People can easily withdraw their affection if they feel their interests are threatened. Fear, on the other hand, is based on a much more primal instinct, self-preservation. People are less likely to betray or disobey a ruler they fear because they know there will be consequences. However, Machiavelli also recognized the dangers of ruling solely through fear. He argued that a ruler who is hated by his people is vulnerable to rebellion, as the people will have no qualms about overthrowing him. He wrote, "The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present." He argued that in the ruthless arena of politics, clinging to past promises or ideals can be detrimental. He believed that a ruler should strive to be feared but not hated, which meant using cruelty and violence strategically, not indiscriminately. He argued that any use of force should be swift, decisive, and justified in the eyes of the public. He believed that a ruler should avoid being hated at all costs. He argued that a ruler who is hated by his people is in constant danger, as the people will be looking for any opportunity to overthrow him. He wrote, "Whosoever desires constant success must change his conduct with the times." He emphasized the importance of adaptability, of recognizing that what works in one situation may not work in another. So, we've talked about how Machiavelli believed it's better to be feared than loved if you can't be both. But he also stressed the importance of avoiding hatred at all costs. Why? Because hatred, in Machiavelli's view, was a recipe for disaster for any ruler. He argued that a ruler who is hated by his people is in a constant state of vulnerability. He's more likely to face rebellions, conspiracies, and assassination attempts. Machiavelli believed that hatred is often rooted in a sense of injustice, either real or perceived. If a ruler is seen as cruel, unfair, or oppressive, he's more likely to incur the hatred of his subjects. He wrote, "Men ought either to be well treated or crushed, because they can avenge themselves of lighter injuries, of more serious ones they cannot. Therefore, the injury that is to be done to a man ought to be of such a kind that one does not stand in fear of revenge." He argued that if a ruler must inflict harm, it should be done decisively and completely, so as to avoid the possibility of future retaliation. He believed that a ruler should be careful not to appear greedy or avaricious. He argued that a ruler should be willing to make sacrifices for the common good, even if it means sacrificing some of his own wealth or power. He also understood the importance of respecting the customs and traditions of the people. He argued that a ruler who attempts to impose radical changes or who disrespects the people's way of life is more likely to provoke resistance and resentment. Machiavelli's advice on avoiding hatred might seem obvious, but it's often ignored by leaders throughout history and even today. We see leaders who engage in corrupt practices, who abuse their power, who disregard the needs and concerns of their people, and we see the consequences: protests, unrest, even revolutions. Machiavelli's message is clear: a ruler who wants to maintain power must avoid becoming an object of hatred. All right, let's talk about the importance of good advice, because even the most brilliant and capable leaders need wise counsel to guide them. Machiavelli understood that a ruler, no matter how intelligent or experienced, couldn't possibly be an expert in everything. He believed that a wise ruler surrounds himself with trusted advisors who can offer different perspectives, challenge his assumptions, and provide honest feedback. He wrote, "And let it be noted that there is no more delicate matter to take in hand, nor more dangerous to conduct, nor more uncertain in its success, than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things." Recognizing the inherent risks and challenges in implementing change, Machiavelli underscores the need for careful planning and strategic execution. He argued that a ruler should choose advisors based on their competence, honesty, and loyalty, not on their social standing or personal connections. He also emphasized the importance of creating an environment where advisors feel comfortable speaking their minds, even if it means disagreeing with the ruler. He believed that a ruler should be wary of flattery and should encourage his advisors to be candid, even if it means delivering bad news or criticizing his decisions. He also stressed the importance of listening to dissenting voices, even if they are in the minority. He argued that a ruler who only surrounds himself with yes-men risks becoming isolated from reality and making poor decisions. Machiavelli's advice on the importance of good advice is timeless and universal. It applies not just to rulers, but to leaders in all walks of life: CEOs, managers, even parents. The ability to seek out and heed wise counsel is essential for making sound decisions, navigating complex situations, and achieving success. So, whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting out, remember the importance of surrounding yourself with people who can offer you honest, insightful, and diverse perspectives. So there you have it, a glimpse into the enduring wisdom of Machiavelli's. It's a book that continues to provoke, challenge, and inspire debate even after all these centuries. Machiavelli's work remains relevant because it grapples with fundamental questions about power, leadership, and human nature, questions that are as old as civilization itself. And while some of his methods might seem shocking or even repulsive, his insights into the machinations of power and the complexities of human behavior are as sharp and insightful as ever. Is not a how-to guide for tyrants, but a mirror reflecting the often uncomfortable realities of power. It's a reminder that the world is a complex and often ruthless place, and that those who seek to lead must be prepared to make difficult choices. Thanks for watching.